Hello, welcome all for this webinar of ITIL 4 with its alignment with the Agile, DevOps, and the Lean. Okay, so this is 2020. I don't know how good is this year that we will come to know at the end of this year, I hope. So, but a lot has changed in the past 10 to 15 years, rather, on the industry side. The the key trends that we have seen in the business over the last 10 years since the last major update that has happened in ITIL front. So before I get into the what are the key trends for which the new version of ITIL was mandated, let me give you a quick understanding of the evolution of ITIL. So ITIL with the core objective to manage the infrastructure and the application that being used by the UK government data centers. In 1989, the ITIL version 1 came in the market. After the first official version, which got published in 1989 in the name of ITIL version 1, it was a proprietary framework only for the UK data centers. But later on, there are various consulting companies, major IT service provider who has worked for the evolvement to its the next version to its ITIL version 2, which came into the industry. We have seen it in 2002. People were happy with the version 2. People started using this framework and they were getting the value out of it. But again, the industry, there were certain changes that has happened. There was certain shift that has happened in the industry from 2003 till 2005, and for which the ITIL identified there is a need to evolve the ITIL framework. And that's why in 2007, precisely, the version 3 publication got released. Version 3 becomes so popular, people are getting the value out of it across the market, across the different industry, across the different spectrum. It's being used and people were really happy with it. It was working so very wonderful, or rather it is working so very wonderful for many organizations that many organizations have made it a mandatory practice for it. But again, starting 2009, we started seeing a major shift or certain shifts in the industry with the advancement of focus on agile, focus on automation, focus on DevOps model, focus on the lean, focus on the more dependency on the virtual environment. ITIL understood there is a need for the evolvement of the current framework to make it much more aligned with the organizations who are actually going through the transformation journey of agile, transformation journey of DevOps Lean. Why? Because we have seen certain trends. The typical trends, I would rather say, the global economy was going through a digital transformation. Some say it's a digital revolution, with more commerce being conducted over mobile devices and more businesses entirely dependent on the IT enabled services in order to conduct its business. The pace of the business and the technology change was increasing. Businesses are more demanding, and the change in the features and the functionality, the frequency of change was much higher. To help support this digital transformation, best practices such as Agile, DevOps, and Lean have emerged and found increasing adoption. These practices each have their own focus, yet, what was needed is a new digital operating model for the IT service management that can tie all of these practices together, enabling businesses to complete and thrive in this new landscape. And that's why the born of ITIL 4 happened. ITIL 4, the main objective was to connect the organizations with the agile, with the DevOps, with the lean focus that the organization do have. Let me give you certain examples of this digitization or rather digitalization. One of the few examples that I would like to, okay, just a moment, something, okay. So let's take the example of the G's augmented reality glasses. So G was providing field technicians with cutting edge augmented reality glasses. Now, how does it work? This allows remote experts to see exactly what the technicians see as they repair wind turbines. It also provides the workers with hands-free access to information, so everything is happening in a digital dashboard you can see. Let me take one more example, the Thomson Reuters algorithm. So Thomson Reuters have actually developed an algorithm that uses streams of real-time data from Twitter to help journalists classify, source, fact check, and debunk rumors faster than ever before. This is, or rather, this was a response to the critical need for accurate information which feeds the 24 hours news cycle. Everyone heard about the Amazon's Echo device. Not only heard it, many of you are using it. So Amazon's Echo device is managing customers' shopping needs and daily demands of busy lives. But now, what is happening? Amazon is now so integrated into day-to-day lives that new apartment complexes are designed dedicated Amazon lockers for their buildings. People now trust the company with physical access to their homes, letting the couriers make deliveries via the Amazon keys and its smart lock system. It's like just like your postal box, you have an Amazon locker. One more. So let's talk about the Netflix. Now we are so very dependent on the content. Now Netflix tracks how customers interact with on-demand film downloads or any sort of downloads, content downloads to improve its recommendations engine. And you must have seen that. What it does, it looks at metrics such as when customers pause the movie and what scenes they watch again and again. Amazon Video cuts its celebrity interviews. In fact, Amazon Video, so just like Netflix, Amazon Video also cuts its celebrity interview section of the Grand Tour after its data showed that most of the international audience actually skipped the section in season one. And that's why from season two, it was not being highlighted. So likewise, there are n number of. So one more example I want to highlight that Airbnb, the way that they have disrupt the industry. They move from the initial idea to product in less than 11 months. It hyperscaled to 10 million bookings in less than 56 months. So that's what we call it as rapid evolution. Now over here, there are certain. So what are the different key characteristics of this technology powered services, which the industry have seen? So imagine you were asked to build a new mobile, let's say a banking service for bank X. Now, how would you define and segment the customers and other stakeholders of the service? How would you know what outcomes they were trying to achieve? How would you define the components of value that really matters for them? As we start to think about the role of service provider, it is worth considering some of the key characteristics of technology powered services that evolved from the virtual cycle of digital transformation. So the one of the key characteristics, the first of it would be the speed to market. Now these services have a quick transition from the initial idea to reality. Airbnb example, just to cite that. This requires much closer collaboration between the teams from the business and the technology. Active involvement from those that really or who really understand the customers, their desired outcomes, and what they value is critical for the success. That's why an integration of the business and the technology is pretty much needed. Another key characteristic, we call it as modular. So these services are designed, these technology services are designed based on modular, which we call it as loosely coupled components, often focusing on a minimum viable service. We many of you have already seen that we call it as iteration, we call it as in agile, we call it as scrum, so like with sprints and all. So this minimum viable services that can quickly benefit from the real world feedback. This architectural style, or rather this architectural change of style, has the added advantage of allowing incremental changes in a small batch sizes. In agile we call it as sprints, in ITIL we call it as iteration, which both reduces the risk of change and increases the change velocity. As with the characteristics above, this also requires close ongoing engagement at the business technology interface. Another key characteristics would be, we always say that fail or scale. The services leverage the low barriers of entry that come from a digital environment. Experimentations are cheap, rapid scaling is possible, and failure is always an option. Failure could mean change, and this sometimes presents a cultural challenge in organizations where the appetite for risk is historically low. Another key characteristics of technology powered services would be the cloud economics. The economics of these services are driven by the operational expenses and the variable cost rather than the capital expense and the fixed cost. This change in economic approach can often provide a catalyst for investment, but also presents challenges because the cost of using the cloud platform are consumption based and maybe unpredictable. We don't know. Another key characteristics we also see that unknown unknowns. Given the pace of this change, it is important to recognize from the outset that there are some things we just don't know. Service owners consciously seek feedback from customers and build adaptive systems that allow the service to incrementally evolve. This can be daunting because it involves consciously seeking feedback and asking customers and other stakeholders what they really think. So that's why we call it an unknown unknown. So we don't know, and that's where the customer comes into the picture. Imagine we are rolling out a new services for which we don't have any historical data. How will I define the metrics, the targets? And that's where the customer's input would be the more valuable ones. Data driven insights, another key characteristics. This type of services leverages on individuals' data for mass personalization. So you call it customer journey mapping. Many of you have already done it, or and this entire data set for those hidden ins are getting used to identify those hidden insights. Not only does this require careful attention to navigate the challenges of information security, it also means that we need to become familiar with manipulating, processing, and drawing insights from huge volumes of data. Of course, automation is one of the automation we try to identify from this data driven insight. So where all we can put this automation. And the focus for this technology services is all about improving the services, not the IT components. The success of each service is reliant on empowered service teams that are free to be adaptive within certain boundaries. Traditional top down leadership based on the functions and rigidly prescribed processes reduces the change velocity and it stifles innovation. Leaders should refocus their efforts on setting appropriate boundaries, developing service teams with a broad range of skills, and removing all unnecessary blockers to adaptive and incremental improvements. So these are the different key characteristics which needed to be addressed. And that's what ITIL 4 has done it. I will go into the ITIL 4, but let me give you why. Let me give you why this alignment was needed. Before I get into this, let me just give you a quick overview of this Agile, Lean, and the DevOps so that you understand why ITIL 4 alignment was needed. Many of you have already worked on Agile, are well versed with the Agile, DevOps, and Lean, but I will just give you a quick look on the Agile, DevOps, and the Lean. So we always know that the Agile focuses on four different perspectives, rather holistically. We always say that the first one would be on individuals and interactions over processes and tools. The focus is more on the working software over comprehensive documentation. The focus more on the customer collaboration rather than contract negotiation. The focus is more about responding to change over following a plan. So this is what the Agile Manifestos talks about. Now, when we talk about the DevOps is all about, it's a movement, we call it, to break down silos between teams. Although many development teams have adopted Agile to speed the life cycle and delivery of new and improved software, a barrier still seems to exist between many development guys and operation teams. DevOps as a model emerged around the mid 2000 as a movement, we call it, to address the common barrier and the siloed nature of many IT organizations. Now, what is lean? A quick walkthrough of what is lean. The lean, we always say, it's a practice to maximize quality by eliminating waste. During the same decade, organizations realized that change was the order of the day, and keeping pace with the changing environment was critical to long term success. Thus, in addition to Agile and DevOps, many organizations began adopting the practice of Lean IT to bring added focus to continuous improvement. Lean IT typically it practices focused it well, or rather its practices or Lean IT practices focused on increasing customer value by eliminating waste from the existing processes and procedures and optimizing operations. Now, although each of this emerging best practice, be it the Agile, be it the DevOps, be it the Lean, has brought something of value to the IT table, and each has been very, very valuable to a lot of IT service providers, but each has fallen short in terms of acting as an overall operating framework for an IT service provider, and that's where the ITIL 4 comes into the picture. There was a need of an operating model which binds the principles, the nitty gritties of all this tree, and helps the IT service provider to follow this as the only IT service management framework, allowing them for a better alignment with the Agile, DevOps, and the Lean if their focus are on those. If I show you the version 3, in version 3 which got released in 2007, um, hypothetically the version 2011 also carries the same format. In there it got introduced the service delivery lifecycle, the SDLC, refers to as service delivery lifecycle, where we talked about the services needs to be strategized, services needs to be designed, it needs to be built in transition, and it needs to be delivered in operation. And continual improvement, it's all about understanding what improvement can be done, the way we are strategizing, the way we are designing, the way we are building, the way we are delivering the service. Was there anything wrong? Not at all. In fact, it has given proven results, it has given proven value across the industry, and it is also providing the value now also. But what is happening? With the advancement of Agile, with the advancement of the Lean, with the advancement of the DevOps, the organization's dependencies or organizational cultural change, sometimes this SDLC or the service delivery lifecycle creates a bureaucracy. And that's why this ITIL 4 integration model which integrates the Agile, Lean, and the DevOps for the better alignment of the organization, addressing all the key trends, addressing all the key changes, the key drivers was needed. And that's where ITIL came up as a new ITIL 4 came up as a new operating model. The new ITIL 4 framework composed of the service value system along with the 4 dimensions model we call it, which will help guide, enable, and equip organizations of all types and sizes to meet the challenges of the new digital age that is upon us. So how it does, ITIL actually introduced a principle-based operating model with its alignment with Agile, Lean, and DevOps. There are certain principles that has been introduced. So in total, there are 7 different principles. We name it as focus on value, start where you are, progress iteratively with feedback, collaborate and promote visibility, keep it simple, practical, think and work holistically, optimize and automate. These are the 7 different principles. But holistically, if I look into it, progress iteratively with feedback, collaborate and promote visibility, think and work holistically. These 3 principles are directly addressing the manifestos of Agile. Keep it simple and practical. This principle is actually addressing the principles of Lean. Optimize and automate and keep it simple and practical. Both these principles are actually focusing on the DevOps. Focus on values is a principle which which is actually addressing the needs, focusing on more on the customer's value. So each of the principles has their own focus areas. Now it is the organization at the very beginning. They need to create a governing body, understands and evaluate which principle they need to adopt. They might adopt all these principles, or they might select few of them, maybe one of them. It depends on what? It depends on the organizational goal. It depends on the various stakeholder needs. But once they adopt any of this principle, then eventually it will help them to understand how to run this ITIL 4 activities. So if the organization is going through an agile transformation, they will adopt 3 out of the 7 principles. If the organization has matured on the agile practices and they're focusing more on the DevOps and the Lean, then out of 7 they might be focusing on 6 out of 7 or maybe all the 7 principles. So it depends on the organization. But adoption of the principle is very much needed to make it aligned with this agile, DevOps and Lean, and that's what ITIL 4 has shown how we do this. ITIL 4 has introduced a concept called service value system. In the service value system, the guiding principles, you can see there are 5 different components: guiding principles, governance, service value chain, practices, continual improvement. So if I have to give in simple word, if I have to tell you, the service value system actually converts the customer requirement, which comes as an input, as an opportunity or demand, to a value driven output. Now to convert this input to an output, we need this service value system, which comprise of these 5 different components: guiding principles, governance, value chain, practices, and continual improvement. These guiding principles will enable an organization to improve the quality of decision making in all circumstances. Governance will ensure that service provider is aligned with its parent organization and is compliant with the standards and the regulations defined by the organization. A series of service value chain activities will ensure that organization carries out the key activities quickly and effectively to produce products and services which enable the value realization by its stakeholders. So that is the service value chain. Now the supporting practices will actually provide the necessary support for all the service value chain activities. And of course, the last component, the continual improvement, will become the mindset of all personnel involved in the provision of the services. So this is what we call it a service value system. So the service value system eventually is nothing but it's your service management part of your organization. You have these people, you have the processes, you have the technology, you have the different vendors working, all of them have to be integrated into and form the service value system. So you can see the core part of the service value system, we call it as a service value chain, where we typically run the different activities that is needed to carry out that is needed to convert the customer requirement as an input to a value driven output. Now, this value chain activities keeps on changing depending on what actually is coming as a requirement. Is it customer requirements can be for a restoration of a new service or restoration of a service? The customer's requirement can be a completely a new RFP, a new service requirements, change of scope, the project's enhancement. Customer requirement may be adding 2 new fields to an existing application. So customer requirements may come as an opportunity or as a demand. So based on the customer's demand, we typically understand what activities that needs to be carried out. These are the different activities we carry out in the service value chain. What are those activities? Plan, engage, design, transition, obtain, build, deliver, support, and improve. Now, let me tell you, which activity I will carry out in the value chain, it entirely depends on what is the customer requirements. For example, if the customer requirement is for a new service, then the first activity I will carry out would be the engage, where I will understand the customer requirement. I will do the requirement analyses. Then I will do the planning. Planning is nothing but where we do the cost benefit analyses. And accordingly, we go back to the customer under design and transition. We go back to the customer and sign off the SLAs. Once the SLA gets signed off, we design the architecture, and then obtain and build is where we do the actual implementation in the on the data center. We do the actual modification in the data center. And before deploying, we again, in step number 5, you see that we are again going back to the service design and transition, where we actually evaluate whether we are good to go or not. Once we get the sign off, then deliver and support is where our production support starts off. So just likewise, the sequencing, the numbering will keep on changing. For some requirements, we might have to go through all the 6 activities. For some requirement, we might have to go to any 2 activities or 3 activities. It's 4 activities. It entirely depends on what is actually coming as a customer requirements. The value stream mapping is the most important part of ITIL 4. And this is what ITIL 4 helps us with. We call it this supporting the digital transformation. We call it high velocity IT. We use this word, which is nothing but ITIL 4 supporting the digital transformation or IT transformation or business transformation, where business and IT are not regarded as a separate organizational functions, but are inseparably, or rather inseparable, as in the case of most digital organizations. IT transformation is no longer an appropriate term, rather. It is still useful to distinguish between how digital technology is applied and how it is realized. But this is a part of a bigger picture. We call it as a digital transformation, and that's what ITIL 4 supports. Now, ITIL 4, it supports HVIT environment, we call it. It supports a high velocity IT environment through adoption of ITIL 4 principles. All the objectives of the high velocity IT get supported by ITIL 4. If I have to just give you a quick overview, so we undergoes various business pressure to realize value quickly. Agile development teams deliver potentially deployable software increments as frequently as possible. Unfortunately, these releases often have to wait for days, weeks, and sometimes months for actual deployment. And this is often the longest delay in the service value stream. And this is usually because of a cautious approach to approval and deployment. Typically, we always see in the industry the typical trend. So The part of the approval process is an assessment by the CAB, or which we call it as Change Advisory Board, that only meet on scheduled days, maybe weekly once or twice or certain days. The actual deployment also happens according to a schedule because CAB comes up with a planned change calendar, we call it. The thinking behind this approach is that change is potentially disruptive and therefore has to be carefully controlled. We understand that. But those irresponsible developers have to be kept at a safe distance from the production environment because IT components has to be safe. We understand that stability of the infrastructure needs to be maintained, but we have to strike a balance between the responsiveness and the stability of the infrastructure, and that's where ITIL 4 comes into the picture. Viewed from other perspective, IT operations is perceived as a bureaucratic department of no, 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 always no, no, we cannot do this now, we cannot do that now. Because of diametrically opposite targets, making changes very quickly versus making changes very carefully. Development and IT operations are in a state of constant battle, with IT service management practitioners in the middle. This tension is actually based on a familiar mental mode in which change disrupts stability and stability controls change. The fewer the change, the lower the risk to stability. But in the past decade, a different way of thinking has emerged. By reducing the size of change, the risk of disruption has been reduced. Smaller changes mean that change happens more frequently. By changing more frequently, the organization's capability of changing or capability to change has been improved. Increased change capability leads in turn to lower risk of disruption. So suddenly the mental model has switched from less change is good to more change is good. The DevOps community has embraced this way of thinking and has developed appropriate practices and supporting technologies, different tools. Research has identified a correlation between high performance in terms of deployment frequency, lead time for change, and change failure rate, with version control, continuous delivery, automated testing likewise. In addition, research also suggests that change approval based on peer review within the team is no less risky than using a change advisory board. And this what ITIL 4 talks about. ITIL 4, just for an instance, ITIL 4 has a practice called change enablement, which help us to understand how to address the balance between the responsiveness and stability of the infrastructure with switching the more mental model from less change is good to more change is good. The new ITIL 4 also supports the DevOps environment. The common way of modeling DevOps activities represented in a horizon figure of 8 with a V you can see. So the overall data, these are the different activities we call it at the service level, like we plan, we engage, we design and transition, we obtain and build. Now all the service value chain activities and the DevOps has been integrated. From operations to development, fast and frequent feedback results in plans for new releases. Now, both development and operation activities are facilitated by infrastructural platforms. Both development, now the focus of the service value chain is on service and how it manifests itself as the interaction between the service provider's products and other resources, including the service consumer resources sometimes. So what ITIL 4 has done, the alignment of the service value chain activities with the DevOps. So we get into a more understanding on this, how to integrate this value chain and the DevOps, how these two models can be integrated, can work together to minimize the distrust between the development guys and the operation. This is what ITIL 4 comes into the picture. One more thing that ITIL 4 has done is we call it goals cascade, a very important part, which actually helps you in addressing the needs of governance. All this time, ITIL 1, ITIL 2, ITIL 3, ITIL 2011 version never talked on the governance part. But as we understand, service value chain demands a lot of flexibility. And when you are going to exercise this flexibility, you have to have a good governance which will enforce a control to ensure that whatever activities you're doing to address the customer's requirement, it is aligned with the organizational need. It address the goals of your parent organization. This goals cascade phenomena has been adopted by ITIL 4 from COVID 5, or now we can call it as COVID 2019. So the goals cascade has been adopted from COVID 5, which help us to ensure that whatever activities that we run in the service value chain, whatever activities that we carry out in the service value chain to address the customer requirements will also address the organizational goals, will also address the organizational policies, will also address the regulatory compliances which comes as an environmental drivers. So ITIL 4 helps you, or rather adopting to ITIL 4 helps you to ensure that the activities that you're carrying out, the activities your development and the production guys are carrying out are aligned with the needs of the customer requirements, are aligned with the organizational goals and the different stakeholder needs. So we always say that the high velocity nature of the digital enterprises are supported by ITIL 4. So we have this new IT operating model for service management supporting the industry need for digital organization, high velocity IT, digital transformation, IT transformation, digital products, digital technology. These are what supported by ITIL 4. And all of this, which will help you, and all of this will actually, the ITIL 4 will actually help you with an understanding, will ensure that all this key drivers can be addressed with the understanding, with ensure valuable investments being rolled out. ITIL 4 will support the industry need for the fast development. ITIL 4 will ensure that it supports the resilient operations. And ITIL 4 will ensure that the value co-creation happens between the consumer and the provider. And it also ensure that the conformances gets aligned or gets met. ITIL 4, under ITIL 4, we have a certification schema, we call it, or certification ladder. You have at the very starting point, we have this ITIL Foundation, ITIL 4 Foundation certification, and then after Foundation, you can opt for either the managing professional path or the strategic leader path. It depends on what is your career goal, which profile you are in, and accordingly you need to select. There are 6 different modules, we call it, but specialist modules. 5 different specialist modules, and 4 fall under the managing professional and 2 falls under the strategic leader. So you need to we will have a separate webinar which will help you to understand which path you should take based on your career. So which will have we will have a separate webinar on that. But just to give you an overview, there are 4 certifications module that you need to complete to become a managing professional. And if you want to become a strategic leader, there are two other modules. So, and the prerequisite for both of this would be, the prerequisite for both this model would be the ITIL foundation.